Oh, hey, this is your hippy dippy DevOps dude. Welcoming you to our special DevOps Unbound. DevOps Unbound Halloween Spectacular, defeating the DevOps demons, goblins of Halloween. We have an amazing cast of people in costume who are going to share their stories with you today. Let me introduce you to our amazing cast. So your hippy dippy DevOps dude, I don't know if it was all the dope or whatever, but he needs real glasses these days. Those rose-colored glasses won't do it. I'm going to need him to introduce our amazing cast. First, let me introduce you to Alexander Sasha Moore, product manager at Tricentis. Sasha, say hello and a little bit about yourself.
Nice to meet you. Thanks for joining, everybody. I'm Alexander Sasha Moore. I'm product manager of Tricentis. I'm responsible for our cloud-based continuous testing platform, and I'm also contributor to our what we say continuous maturity assessment tool, which helps our customers in understanding where they are in the continuous testing journey and how to apply continuous testing, and contributed to the ACT framework, which helps to set up the right roles and processes in enterprise organizations.
Fantastic. On my screen anyway, next to Sasha is Dr. Parag Doshi, VP Engineering at Tricentis. Parag, welcome.
Thank you very much, Alan. Hi, I'm Parag Doshi. I'm a recent addition to Tricentis, like Sasha, focused on continuous testing. Prior to that, I had also worked at large healthcare companies like Anthem and was our chief technologist and head of architecture for Hewlett Packard for building out virtual private clouds and running DevSecOps and trying to transform corporations digitally. Happy to be here.
Okay. Next up is our very own Hot Lips. Well, she's not really Hot Lips. She just looks like her, though. Tracy Reagan, CEO of Deploy Hub, as well as board member of the CDF. Tracy,
thank you, Alan.
welcome. Go ahead.
Thank you so much. Thank you for inviting me on this very special day. You know, Halloween is going to be very sad this year because nobody can go out trick or treating. So I'm happy to get to dress up for this. And yes, I am the CEO of Deploy Hub. I'm also the executive director of our open source core called Ortelius. I'm on the board of the CD Foundation, and I'm a DevOps Institute ambassador. And what we do is we version and track microservices back to their application, and we generate impact analysis reports and bill of material reports and track what is now called a logical application in a microservices installation.
Fantastic, Tracy. Thanks for coming and being with us today. Next up, from a galaxy far, far away, we have Mitchell Obi-Wan Ashley. Mitchell is with Accelerated Strategies Group, and he's also a Jedi. Mitchell, introduce yourself.
Thank you. You first need to know if you strike me down, I shall become more powerful than you can possibly imagine.
Okay.
I'm Mitch Ashley. I'm CEO, maybe not anymore after this, of Accelerated Strategies Group, an analyst firm that focuses on cloud native, DevOps, digital transformation, cybersecurity. I've also been a CIO implementing DevOps and things like that. So great to be here. Thanks for giving us this opportunity to play dress up. It's fun.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Wouldn't miss it. Next up, we have the one and only Jasmine James, now of Twitter, actually. Jasmine, welcome. Introduce yourself.
Thank you. Thank you, Alan, for inviting me. Super excited to be here. So I recently joined Twitter about 3 weeks ago, still figuring out, the environment, but I'm a part of the engineering effectiveness organization where we focus primarily on removing pain points from our developers' lives. 4 years before this, I was a part of a large airline. A lot of publicity and talks that I've done are around that transformation journey. So happy to be here and share everything I've learned over the past 5-10 years. Thank you.
All righty. Also, I should mention that we do have another panelist who had some technical difficulties. He just sent me a screenshot of his reboot. He will be joining us, hopefully, and that's Derek Weeks of Sonatype All Day DevOps, DevSecOps Days. And as I said, hopefully Derek will join in, and when he does, I will be sure to introduce him. But
And I'll do a
panelists,
shameless.
thank you.
I'll do a shameless plug for Derek. You know, All Day DevOps is November 12th. So
Absolutely, and I think it's 24 or 28 hours and
24 hours.
150 or something speakers, and it's a pretty cool event. And Derek and Mark Miller do a great job with it. So, panelists, thank you for dressing up. Thank you for all coming here. Our attendees, thank you for joining in, and hopefully we're going to entertain you with some amazing stories of defeating DevOps demons, ghouls, ghosts, and goblins today. Before I turn our panelists loose on the audience, I wanted to just quickly mention this is a roundtable, and it's highly interactive, and it depends on the audience to participate. So we're counting on your participation. How you participate is by asking questions, commenting on what you're going to hear. For most of you, your GoToWebinar control panels up in your top right-hand corner. If you look at it, you'll see a section marked questions. And if you hit the little arrow next to questions, it should expand for you. And you can see that you could type your questions in there in real time. We're not waiting to the end of the show to do questions. We'll take questions as they come, as we can fit them in. So as a question pops in your head, please do so. Francis says good morning, and good morning to you, Francis. Or it's morning where you are. Some people may be listening to it in the evening. But so please ask your questions in there. Also, I am going to be asking 3 poll questions today. They're simple questions. They're only as good as if you answer them, though. So please take the time. They're multiple choice, A, B, or C's. But answer the questions. It'll help me join the fun and make this more interactive. With that, though, let's jump into our panel. So I've asked each of our panel members to kind of prepare an anecdotal story of DevOps demons or ghouls or ghosts or goblins that they've had to deal with during their careers. And each of our panelists is going to give you a little personal story of what they've had to do. If it's okay, I think, Mitch, why don't you lead us off, break the ice, and give us your defeating DevOps demon story?
Yeah, happy to. It actually kind of it started with my journey into DevOps about 2013 or so. Alan, you told me about this thing called Devops. Go check it out. Mm-hmm. And so I ended up reading the Phoenix project and said, this is great. Let's see what we can do. So I brought in, we did a little book club at work in the IT group that I was running and said, let's read this together. And went through the whole process and, hey, this is great. Let's try this and try this. But one of the things that kind of happened is that there suddenly started sort of this, using the Halloween theme, this kind of witch hunt for Brent. If you remember Brent from the Phoenix project, who was the bottleneck for everything. And we were trying to figure out who was Brent, and it wasn't that serious, but it was, am I Brent? Am I the person that is just holding this up, or who is? And we all figured out kind of we had a little bit of Brent in us in our own ways. But that was our first, okay, let's not use this to find the bad person. Let's use this to go do some good things with it. So, and a lot of great things happened from there.
Excellent, excellent. Before we jump into our next one, I wanted to ask maybe our first polling question of our audience today. And again, it's only as good as your answers. So the quicker you answer, the quicker we get back to our stories. But what has been your organization's most troublesome area in your DevOps journey? Was it around culture, around tools, around leadership, or was it a lack of skills, or around skills? So please take your responses. It shouldn't hopefully take too long, but I'd like to get at least half of us voting. So I'm going to give you about 5 more seconds, and we'll close voting down. So 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. People asking, you can vote hopefully by clicking the quick poll that you see on your screen. All right, we're going to close that poll off. And let me share the results with you. Wow, 50% of the people said it was their culture. Only 11% said tools. Leadership and skills, kind of close, 16 and 23%. Those are kind of what I expected. I frankly didn't expect culture to be that high. I knew it would be right up there, but it doesn't surprise us, I guess. Excellent. So let's now go to, all right, looks like we lost our regular slide there. Okay, we'll go back to it. But next up, Sasha, why don't you give us your DevOps story?
Absolutely. So one of my favorite stories is and you have to understand I'm coming from the testing space, is we had a discussion with a customer. It was about one and a half year back when they was undergoing their digital transformation. And when you think about testing center, test center of excellence, do you know what a test center of excellence is? Should I briefly explain that?
Well, I know Jasmine ran the DevOps Center of Excellence, but why don't you go ahead, Sasha?
So what is a test center of excellence? Typically, you can imagine it like a cars manufacturer, a production line. When you get all the parts like the engine and the gearbox and the chassis, and you need to put and assemble all these together and validate that what you're building is really working as expected. And our customers would typically, enterprise customers would have set up a test center similar to like a production line. The test center is responsible at the end of the process to validate that all the applications, the dozens and hundreds of applications would interconnect. And when we talk about DevOps, the question is always, does a test center of excellence fit into the DevOps world, or should we kind of eliminate it? And it was for me kind of eye-opening, because the customer said, we think we need a test center, but our management is planning to reduce the center completely. Their vision is we don't need test centers. The teams should do everything. We are setting up CI/CD pipelines. The teams are responsible. We build this, you build it, you run it scheme. And the test center, what we saw is too inefficient. It's too slow. And 1 year later, when we checked in with the customer, he was like, without test center, without any kind of governance, not just for each of the applications via CI/CD pipelines, it hasn't worked out for us. We understood we need something kind of a matrix, like a horizontal and a vertical check. And that's what we currently see when it comes to testing. Testing is not just like what the team is doing. It's important, but it's always around the collaboration and the test validation across the pipelines and across the application landscapes. And that's
excellent,
for me quite interesting to hear.
Yeah, I think for others. Okay, our next DevOps demon, or defeating DevOps demon story, comes from Jasmine James. Jasmine, why don't you share?
Absolutely. So I am in costume. I'm calling myself the Wicked Witch of cultural transformation. And it's interesting that cultural transformation was #1, because that's what my story stems from. I'm titling it also Lions and Tigers, Cultural Transformation, oh my. So when you think about the Wicked Witch within the Wizard of Oz story, yeah, that's who I am. So when I think about my time, at the multiple companies that I've been a part of, I think that this has been one of the most difficult things to really drive home, especially within large organizations. I led not only the tooling efforts for creating all of the tools that enable DevOps, but also how do we level up on skills and create a culture of DevOps within the teams. And that was the most troublesome jump for a lot of folks. And my story is really just around how in our DevOps dojo, when I was a part of that large airline, a lot of the growth that we saw with teams, it was hard to come by. And, one of the things that really came back over and over again was those old habits. It's very hard to break old habits as it's related to CI/CD practices, code quality, things of that nature, especially if they didn't exist previously. So I like to, relate it to those monkeys, the flying monkeys that, attacked Dorothy and her crew as they were traveling to the Wizard of Oz. they just kept popping up, those old habits, just wanting teams to go back into their old ways. So thankfully, we were able to create that continuous adaptation to create value with teams and meet them where they are. And that's really what helped us drive that cultural adoption and DevOps practice within the teams and help them just keep those habits and not go back into the old world. So just a short story. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, Jasmine, that James from the audience he said, "Ask the wicked witch." How could anyone think you're a wicked witch? I don't know. I thought, but whatever. How do we get past cultural challenges where the culture is highly driven by regulation? In this case, the banking industry. Look, but yet we're seeing it done. Jasmine, if you want to take the lead on that, and I'll ask the rest of the panel
Yeah.
to kind of jump into.
Yeah. So, not having, a huge amount of experience in, a highly regulated industry like the banking industry. I think the most regulation that we have is from around privacy and data. But I think that cultural challenges are everywhere. They're definitely something that's even probably harder to overcome. And when you have so much regulation and so many just hurdles to jump over to get anything done. I think it just takes a lot of tenacity from the team that's driving that cultural adoption and making sure that they're creating an understanding within the teams, an understanding within leadership, that they understand what are the benefits of doing these things, right? Versus just doing it just because, no, we have to understand the value. And then also relating it back to safety, right? When you're thinking about regulation, it's all about safety. How can we even leverage some of the DevOps tooling standards to drive additional safety within a regulated industry? So just my take on it.
Fair enough. Anyone else on our panel want to?
Yeah, I can add to that.
Go, Parag.
Yeah, so speaking of regulated industries, in addition to financial services, another one is healthcare. And, one of the stories there relate to that cultural shift, which I saw, over 50% of of the attendees here really looking at that as a problem. Even in healthcare, we've seen that to be a problem, because I can tell you a horror story there where we've had our member portal, for healthcare insurance go down one day, and the immediate reaction of all the executives is, what's going on? Let's fix this as fast as possible. How did this happen? Who let the defects out? And instead, what the engineering team did was, within seconds, redeployed the entire site, which was unheard of a year prior to that. And that really said, okay, well, this engineering team prioritized time to recovery over the unexpected challenge or impossible challenge of never having a defect in production. That's just inherently not going to happen. Assume that things will happen in production as you release, and if you can prioritize how quickly you can recover over having a 0% defect leakage rate, I think that can go a long way, and that was some of my experiences in the healthcare area. The second point I'd say in regulated industries, I think, is, as Jasmine correctly pointed out, is it's about security, data privacy. Here, culturally, one of the most important factors that I've found is make the CISO, the Chief Information Security Officer, your best friend. I was a VP of cloud, but if I did not have my CISO on my side that also saw the vision, we would have been hopeless. And so we worked together to build out a security roadmap and tie in all the necessary security controls before we even ever considered putting protected information into, or even talk about putting that into a public cloud.
Excellent point. Excellent point. I just want to mention also that, currently in the U.S. here, the health industry, our health vertical is under a real threat right now with this ransomware thing, and I'm praying that a lot of organizations are doing what they need to do And it's at a bad time in the middle of this COVID crisis, an election, and we're dealing with this. Bad people never miss an opportunity to take advantage of a crisis. So anyway, anyone else to the point that James had asked around banking or finance industry? Sasha?
Yes, so for the regulation part, this is also, as Jasmine and Paragon already said, it's not just about understanding how a shift to DevOps and how a shift to agile and delivery mode still complies with what the regulations would ask for. It's about documenting, and when you go for agile, when you transform your teams, it doesn't mean that you document anything anymore. You work differently, you work in user stories, you work in your team, but you still document. And you document your tests, you document your actions, you check in your code, and all the steps that you would perform now in a more efficient way, and now in a team that's in a cross-functional team, they are documented in the right way, in a data warehouse, in any kind of analytics store, or in a version system, or in a test tool. So if you set up the process, and if you set up this kind of collaboration across all your teams in the right way, you don't interfere with the regulations, you still comply with it. And that's something what customers sometimes might tend to forget here. It's not about separating development and test and operations. It's around how they can collaborate and how the tools can help them still to comply and document tasks which are necessary.
Excellent. Good stuff. All right. I just want to check. I think our last panelist is here. He's costumed as the Invisible Man, but hopefully we'll be able to at least hear him. Derek Weeks, are you there?
I am here, but I'm going to be the Invisible Man since my camera is refusing to
All
work.
right. Hey, you know what? We may nominate you for innovative costume. Works so good we really can't see you. But hey, Derek, just thanks for joining us. That's more importantly, and we're still going through everyone's story. We'll add you to the list. And a reminder to our audience, please pop questions in the question section, because we're not saving them for the end. We're going to get to them. And Jasmine, it looks like you have a fan in the audience there with James, but we'll let it go. Next up, our own Hot Lips Houlihan here, Tracy Reagan. Tracy, tell us your story.
Well, I call this story the Hungry Ghost story. This happened right around the time that we all decided that object-oriented programming was going to be the way to go. And this was around OS2 as well. So OS2 has some special things that happens when you build applications for OS2. And it's the story about SOER 3030.dll, which has a matching .lib. This was for a financial company that has a strictly audited process. And because it's an OS2, when you load up a DLL into memory in OS2, if it's already there, it doesn't go reload it. And we were getting oftentimes when people would go to do a standard error, and this SOER 3030 was all about a standard error routine. All the teams were required to use the same one. But we would get traps. That horrible tombstone that we used to call an OS2 would show up, and it would be in the middle of a transaction, in the middle of working with a customer where there was an error routine, and it would go call the SOER 3030, and it would create a tombstone. I was working, I would call it, at the time, I was sort of straddling the testing and operation side of the house. Maybe you would call that an SRE today. And I was given the task to go find out what happened. So I decided to just do a search on all of the servers throughout this entire organization, which had, literally thousands of servers, for SOER 30.dll. And I piped it to the printer, thinking I'd get a page, and I went home. The next day, I went to the printer in the hall, and it had stopped. And I was like, that's interesting. It stopped. And I looked at my ad printed out, and it was like a pile of paper.
You were responsible for losing a forest in the Pacific Northwest. Yeah.
And I was like, well, that's interesting. Well, I had actually trapped a file too. And so I pulled that into an Excel spreadsheet because I wanted to see what the heck, why were there so many copies of this thing everywhere? and I, sorted it by size, and literally there was only a handful that were the same. So what I discovered was we had a lot of SOER 3030 running, not only in our production environment, but our testing environment and our development environment. And when I dug a little deeper, I realized that every single application team was compiling shared libraries from their own repository, meaning that they had their own versions and they didn't rename them. Now, the industry decided to get real brilliant and solve this problem, not by solving the make step, which would have been a lot easier, but they decided to rename those libraries instead. And so now, instead of having a central place to fix things, you had to fix every version. Now, the reason why I bring up the story about SOER 3030 is because we are entering the same exact situation with microservices. Microservices, if they're implemented correctly, should be highly reused. There should only be one common error routine. So if you need to fix it for the organization, you fix it, push it back out to your Kubernetes cluster, and depending on how your Kubernetes deployment file has been defined, everybody should pick it up. Similar to, in our healthcare situation, if we have a ransomware issue in a Kubernetes cluster, we should be able to fix it in one place, and everybody gets the repair. So don't let a hungry ghost take over your Kubernetes environment, because that's called sprawl. And in my case, this was during the object-oriented days, we had sprawl of a single function. And that's the scary part and the complexity around microservices.
Thank you, Tracy. That was great. Parag and Derek, you're up next. But before we do, I wanted to grab another question from our audience. Tim says most of the horror stories he's had to deal with in implementing DevOps and client organizations is dealing with the politics, power games, etc. What's the panel suggestions for helping MAP deal with this kind of soft issue? I think we've all had to deal with that. Anybody want to, Jasmine, you've dealt with it in big organizations. I don't want to put you on the spot, but you want to give them an answer to start?
Sure. It's not easy. There's a lot, especially in organizations that have been around for quite some time. There's a lot of specialization, and a lot of folks don't want to give that up because, sometimes it equates to job security, it equates to a lot of things. But I do think that hiring right is very important, making sure that when you're seeding, those folks that are going to drive your DevOps initiatives, that they have the right mindset and want to not hold that power centrally and want to provide the teams with autonomy and empower them essentially. Someone coming in with the wrong mindset is not going to lead to a successful DevOps transformation. That I do know. So I'll just end it there.
And I could add to that. I
Sure,
certainly could add to that. Somebody told me once they didn't want to be persuaded, they wanted to be convinced. And that kind of stuck with me because what I realized was I was trying to persuade them to do something and instead of convincing them that it was the right thing for them to do. The other thing that I've noticed in a transformation, whether it be going from a traditional model to agile or DevOps, whatever, we're constantly pivoting in the software industry, is that it's important to know, and leadership has to be able to allow their teams to fail fast, hopefully, but failure is not bad. And leadership has to have, whether it be a manager or at a director level, they have to have their employees' backs and allow them to fail, because it's only through failure that we can experience change and understand what we need to do to move forward. So those two things: don't persuade, provide a convincing argument that makes me think I want to do this, as opposed to I'm being told to do it. And let me fail. Let me discover and fail and have my back when I do it.
And I can add to that too, Tracy. I think something else that can help is, rather than saying you must change to the rest of the organization, is really be clear on the why. What is the business outcome that we're trying to achieve that we can unify around, right? Instead of, this is my agenda that I'm trying to force on you because I'm a believer in DevOps. Is if it's part of a transformation strategy or we're implementing rapidly implementing contactless services, or whatever it might be, the driver behind why you want to implement DevOps. And hopefully it's more than just an IT thing. It's a business customer, a joint success across the organization. That at least gives you a rallying cry that isn't your own personal agenda. And folks will more easily sign on to that. And they can figure out, to your point, Tracy, they can figure out, well, what does that mean? How can I help achieve that, right, through DevOps and other means?
And I'll add to that I think it's a lot to do with humans and their emotional feelings about any sort of transformational change. And what to back up what Tracy said, it is about having people's back, right? So if they look at any sort of transformation or improvements or change to processes are actually an opportunity to learn. Why do we want our precious employees, our institutional knowledge to help us grow, is so that it's a continuous learning organization, right? So I think very much so encouraging, hey, look, say we're doing a cloud transformation or whatever the business goals are, encourage your employees that this is your opportunity to learn. And remember back when we all might have taken our first computer science course in high school or junior high school, where you thought that as soon as I make one line of code change, I can see the screen color change in production immediately. That childish expectation of immediate results, don't ever lose that. Reawaken those urges that we've had since early days, and say this is exactly all we're trying to do. Is saying somehow our systems have become so complex, so much legacy. And now what we're trying to do is say, hey, it's not sufficient just to build an application. You now need to think about the full life cycle. How do you create? How do you deploy, test, the full life cycle? So at one click, everything gets provisioned, your application gets deployed, a battery of tests run, it's running in production, a sanity test is done, and you see the screen color change with one line of code change. Don't lose that childish expectation.
Yeah. Good stuff.
It's not just
Sasha.
a childish. It's not just a child. Something childish. It's really about show the success. So when you want to grow the transformation, the idea, and the culture in your organization, it's about how leaders are leading. It's about to do the first step, to start small, show success, and with the success, you get more and more rolling. It's like a snowball which gets bigger and bigger. And that's where you say, Parag, you need to show the success. You have a small area where you just push a line code into production. You show how this works, and step by step, this is something where you can grow your organization and where you can grow the culture. And that's where it comes back to convince, explain the why, and lead in the right way, and give the idea of how to fail and fail fast.
And for my regulated industry friends, I'll back up to say at least a pre-production. We have separation of duties before we go to production, but then you just press the second button, right? So that's the vision we need to have while we still keep our compliance in check.
Absolutely. Hey, we're gonna go to Derek's Ghost and Demon story in a moment. Before we do, I wanted to ask another quick poll question and get our audience a little bit more involved, and remind you to type your questions in the question section if you have any. But if you wouldn't mind answering this, most of us anyway, are working remote. How has this affected your DevOps transformation? Has it been an accelerant? Has it made your DevOps transformation accelerated? Has it slowed down, or has it stayed the same? It really hasn't had much effect at all. One of those three, hopefully, unless you haven't done a DevOps transformation at all, of course. But please give us your votes here. We need a few more to get a good sampling. There's a lot of you out there. I'm going to shut voting down though in about 5 seconds. So make your choices. 5, 4. Come on, there's more people need to vote here. 3, 2, 1. All right. Thank you very much. We're going to close our poll up, and I'm going to show you our results. Wow.
Wow.
Right down.
Wow.
Oh my goodness.
I wouldn't have expected that.
I wouldn't have either.
That is
What's the margin of error?
unexpected. Yeah, let's hope it doesn't go like this on Tuesday.
Plus or minus 30% margin.
Okay. Interesting. I thought things would be accelerated. We hear such great stories, but I guess maybe it's not. Things are slowing down, or they're staying the same, about even. Any of my panelists want to comment on that?
You know, I just read an article. It's going to get published. They asked me to look at it and give my feedback on it, and it asked a similar question. And what response they got was the need for automation became more apparent.
Mm-hmm.
Which I thought was pretty key. It's like, oh, we should have been automating this stuff so it's not so hard to deal with. So automation became something that was more apparent because of our COVID situation.
Which to me would have led to an acceleration of DevOps and stuff like that. But I mean, the numbers kind of speak for themselves. Very interesting.
Sometimes you just limp along on what you have until you can look at what you can do better in a different environment where everybody can be in the same room and really redesign it. But it was clear that people understood why automation was so important.
Absolutely. All right. With
I would absolutely back this up, and I would have guessed that acceleration would be far more than 50-60%. With our customers, we get now, let's say, a tremendous request around automation. How can automation be enabled? We need to move faster. We need to move to the cloud. We need to do more automation, test automation. So I'm really kind of surprised that just 30% says it accelerates them.
Actually, Alan, I've got some data just to share with everyone. We did some research on this topic about 60 days ago, so during the August-September timeframe. And organizations said that they were accelerating their digital transformation, their move to the cloud. The way they described their use of DevOps is really more about some of the principles or ways that we do Agile in DevOps. So for example, they didn't say it was DevOps or Agile. They just said we're doing stand-up meetings more daily. Like over half the respondents said they're doing stand-up meetings. They're doing much more cross-functional teams. They're automating tasks. So it's kind of interesting. They didn't point it out as DevOps, but it was well over half that found that they were certainly moving more quickly towards DevOps. So a little different than this sampling that we've taken today.
Really interesting. Good stuff. All right. One more. Go ahead.
One very quick thing. I'd like to add that I think it comes down to leadership, right? Those companies that see our current situation in the world, right, as this is an opportunity to increase automation. And you see those companies breaking out now. Look at the digital companies and how they are keeping restaurants open, how they are, the cloud providers are breaking away. Just take a look at the market as well, right? I think it's a matter of having that leadership to stay the course and say, we are actually able to measure the benefits of actually enabling DevOps.
Absolutely. Good stuff there. Derek, my invisible man, you're up with your story of ghosts, goblins, and ghouls.
I had a great costume plan, so I'm just going to have to put it on Twitter, and everyone can see me there. So sorry I can't be on camera, but glad to be here, and thanks for welcoming me, Alan, and good to see all of my friends here as well. I have a bit of a trick and treat story, and so part of it, just starting with the treat, I've spent a lot of time studying high-performance software development organizations, software supply chains, open source use in software development, and a lot of that a lot of the use of open source within software development has enabled us, is part of the enablement of DevOps in moving faster in development. No one has to write all their code from scratch anymore. You can just download bits of code from the internet in seconds, use it for free, and that allows you to move faster. And about 80% of an application out there right now is open source binaries or open source packages that are built in. And so some of the interesting things that I've seen over time, we run this annual DevSecOps community survey. And as part of that, since 2018, we've seen the number of open source related breaches decline about 30% year over year. They've gone from about 30% of organizations to about 20% of organizations. And a lot of that has to do, I think, with the kind of post-Equifax breach scenario, where people are saying, I don't want to be the next Equifax. So they're making investments in how do I avoid getting breached through an open source, vulnerable open source package. But the kind of trick in this, or ghoul in the pipeline, is that adversaries know that organizations are investing in looking for the known vulnerable open source components out there. So the adversaries have shifted tactics in the last few years to look at how can I go and contribute myself as an adversary to an open source project and inject malicious code into that project and then have it downloaded by 1,000, 10,000, 100,000 people a week. And that's kind of the new normal attack vector, or the leading edge attack vector. And we saw about 1,000 instances of those kind of open source project-based attacks last year. But the real kind of head scratcher that we saw back in May was this vulnerability called Octopus Scanner, and it was discovered by GitHub researchers. And what this did was it started to modify the NetBeans IDE that developers were using, and the NetBeans IDE would inject malicious payloads into any jar that was being built in the IDE. And so this wasn't just, hey, let's go and infiltrate an open source project and try and commit malicious code there, but let's just go to the developer tools themselves, and we're going to inject malicious code into anything that they're building. So the adversaries are kind of the ghouls in these pipelines of, we're all using these components. The known vulnerable ones are the easiest to find. The maliciously injected code at the beginning of a supply chain is a lot more difficult, if not impossible, to identify. And this is because a contribution from me or Alan or Jasmine into an open source project effectively looks the same if you're not looking for those kind of security vulnerabilities in the code up front. So that's my story for Halloween here.
Thank you, Mr. Invisible Man. Good stuff. Hey, before we jump, Parag, we still have you, but we've got a couple of questions from the audience that I wanted us to hit on as well. And again, I'll remind our audience, feel free, if you have a question of the panel, pop it in the question section here. Brian from the audience says that they're just starting out on their transformation journey, and they find it overwhelming trying to identify tools in the tool chain here. There's just so many. It's daunting as there are just so many options. So kind of your value stream here. And it is, there's certainly a lot, there's no shortage of DevOps related tools, whether it be, from the furthest left all the way through to deployment and post-deployment, including testing, including DevSecOps, including everything. Jasmine, you headed up a DevOps Center of Excellence. I don't mean to keep calling you first, but it seems you and Tracy always have the answers. But would you like to go first?
Yeah, absolutely. So during my time in the past few years, right, I was tasked with bringing on a full tool chain for modern CI/CD, and there's no shortage of tools out there whatsoever. It's overwhelming at times. So I had to come up with a framework for evaluating these tools. And at the time, I was teaching my daughter how to read vowels. So it's AEIOU, and the first one, A, stands for applicability in your environment. How applicable is the tool? E stands for enterprise readiness. At the company I was at, we had to make sure that we had support, right? So open source tools were not really going to work for us. So that's enterprise readiness. The next one is I for integration. How well do the tools work together to get the job done that you're trying to achieve? Then you have the O, which is for overhead. So my team also managed the administration of the tool. So one thing we had to think about was how were we going to make sure these were adopted, and how much overhead would be on my team to own it. Last thing is usefulness. You know, buying a tool when you don't have everything else in place is not the most effective thing to do. So making sure that it's useful for you at that right time. So using those AEIOU was able to decide on a lot of tools at that company, including, you know, Sonatype and the other tools out there. So that was helpful for me, but definitely come up with a method that works for you at your company and your environment.
Love it. AEIOU, conjunction junction. Anyone else with a good suggestion for how do you weed through the plethora of tools out there? Trace?
Yeah, terminology matters. There's a lot of noise in our DevOps CI/CD market. You know, deployments, delivery. What's the difference? So let's just the baseline. Continuous integration was started for the whole single purpose of getting a trigger from a check-in to run your makefile. Simple. We don't have make files anymore. We went from make to ant, and now we have other kinds of build files, but it's basically the same thing. Can you create your binary at any point in time? And that's what continuous integration was. Continuous delivery is an orchestration process. It is the blue ocean of Jenkins. It's not deployment. Continuous delivery says, if I have a successful build, what's my next, and the development team is done with doing the work, I need to push it to a testing workflow, for example. Continuous deployment is actually done at every state. If you're a developer and you want to do a unit test, you have to deploy it out to your environment to do that unit test. If you're pushing it off to the testing teams, you need to install it before they can run their test. And of course, the holy grail of the whole thing is, will production teams consume the repeatable process that dev and test did? And oftentimes they don't, and that's why CD or continuous deployment dies at the testing state. So really understanding the landscape of what these DevOps tools are and the terminology around them is really, really difficult. Everybody uses the same terms. I've seen CI, CD, and continuous deployment used interchangeably. And if that's not confusing, I don't know what is. So the
Absolutely.
CD Foundation did create, I created for the CD Foundation a landscape. Go to cd.foundation. You can go and you'll see in there, I believe it's under their projects, you'll see an interactive landscape. If you don't know what the CD Foundation is, it is a sister organization to the CNCF, all under the Linux Foundation's guidance. And the CD Foundation its mission is to help organizations to deliver software updates out to all the way to production with both security and speed. They are working very hard on defining these types of terms, creating a single place where we can all have a conversation about what this means, so that it's not so confusing, because it is confusing with there's so many tools. And you know, I hear people say Jenkins does my deployments. Well, Jenkins doesn't do deployments. Somebody who wrote a really cool script did the deployment, and Jenkins called it. So defining these terms and defining what you want to do within your process is critical. But getting it down to the terms first is a really good place to start.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Go ahead.
Alan, I'll build off of a little bit of what Jasmine said. It is, you know, how much overhead is this tool within your environment? Like how much effort does it take, whatever tool that you're trying to use, to get it to work? And that's, you know, I think that's true of kind of any software tool that you would select. But I think that if you check with people in the community, and there's usually, it's pretty easy to find anyone in the community using any tool to talk about the effort to kind of get it up and running and keep it up and running, and what does that take to maintain it. And the other thing, like while we're talking about DevSecOps related stuff, is there are a number of DevSecOps tools that were kind of built before DevOps, and there were DevSecOps tools built after and specifically for DevOps environments. And in that case, one of the kind of leading criteria I would say is, are developers going to use it, and do developers want to use it? Because sometimes, like, I run into people at different events that are out there when we go to them and they're like, yeah, I'm using X tool from so-and-so vendor for DevSecOps, and they're in the security group, and I'm like, do your developers use that? And they're like, no, we can't get them to use it. And if the developers can't use it, right, then it's not getting you toward that end objective that you want. So I think that kind of examination, if you're not in dev, but you expect dev to use it, is really, figure out and do your evaluation of, is development actually going to use this tool? And are there instances and proof points of them doing that?
Fair enough. Anybody else want to comment on this thread? Or, otherwise, Parag, you still have to tell us your story. Parag, you're either muted or something.
Sorry, I was muted. You're right.
Yep. Okay.
Yeah, I'll weave in my story to save some time, along with backing up what Tracy said, as a follow-on as well. One of the things that Tracy mentioned is that it really is about the testing that things seem to be a problem. I think of that as the Achilles heel of making that speed to deploy into any environment really the critical success factor. So the way I like to think about this, about all these terms, is we oversimplified to just CI/CD, and Tracy even talked about continuous delivery being different from continuous deployment, right? So I like to add CT in there, maybe CI, CT, and CD. So continuous testing is to me the Achilles heel of actually getting this done right. We talk about DevOps, but to get it actually to work and to deliver and deploy with confidence is still a challenge for every corporation I've ever worked with in trying to enable their DevOps or their cloud transformations. Another, in addition to CT, I'd say is also the automated provisioning. I think of any sort of a cloud transformation and DevOps transformation, they go hand in hand. It's a symbiotic relationship where if I really want to get DevOps right, again, that single click of the button and then I can see results immediately requires that I can provision any part of my solution, whether it's infrastructure, a platform, my custom application, business processes on top of that. I expect immediate provisioning. And in fact, in some of the transformations I've been involved with, if you are even talking about moving an application to cloud, we've even had a governance model that says no more tweaking around in all these different environments. The way you get code out is through DevOps. That's the minimum prerequisite to allow an application team to come into our landing zones. So I think of that as a symbiotic relationship.
I'm just going to add, Parag,
go ahead.
You're talking about another continuous, across all of that is continuous improvement, right? It's not just about setting up one pipeline and we're good and we're all done. It's central to DevOps is really this ongoing, how do we make it better? How do we be data driven about making our decisions? And then, what the tool is now may change later. It's sort of, the tool is a vessel for getting something done, but that may change over time. And it's that continuous improvement that you can measure those outcomes you're looking for in any of those steps or across the entire pipeline, the workflow.
And you might as well add continuous learning as well. We saw the second biggest challenge is the fact that people don't have enough skills, right? So we need a culture, an atmosphere where we reinforce that constant learning. We can't just hire the right people and say, do you know technology A, B, and C? Because in 6 months later, A is certainly legacy for sure, maybe B even, right? So it's a never-ending continuous learning cycle. And what all of these large corporations, what we're trying to do is build out this platform. And I think it was Jasmine that talked about integration as one of her AEIOUs, the I there. I think integration is absolutely key. So when we look at the 170 or plus DevOps or DevSecOps products that we can choose from, what I like to advise is try to minimize the alphabet soup of technologies. So if you happen to work in an AWS environment, look at what you can use that's perhaps cloud specific or cloud native. If you're multi-cloud and perhaps you've gone the Kubernetes route, cloud native route, then look at what products and technologies in the Kubernetes distributions actually have the DevOps tooling pre-integrated. No one has time to spend a year building out a platform before they actually use that platform. So a lot of companies are spending too much time building the platform, doing integration of the platform before they get integration of their actual applications.
Just at the end of the day, I think we need to remember it's about the application, stupid, right?
Yeah.
The whole point of the public cloud and DevOps is that we don't spend an inordinate amount of times reinventing that wheel, right? We want to be deploying, and but be that as it may.
Value comes
from
deploying apps.
Yep. So I just got to do a little housekeeping. First of all, I didn't mention it at the top of the show. DevOps Unbound is sponsored by our friends at Tricentis. So many thanks to them for sponsoring it. In addition to these monthly roundtables, we also do every other week a video show, TV show, whatever, called DevOps Unbound. We have panels like this. It's not open to live questions, but we have great conversations on all DevOps related topics. We've pulled this all together now at a domain, DevOps Unbound. No surprise, devopsunbound.com. And you can go there and see all of our past roundtables, all of our past video shows. There's audio versions of the episodes to listen to as well. So I just wanted to point everyone to DevOps Unbound. Also on these roundtables, we always give out Amazon gift cards. So happy Halloween to the following 4 folks: Wendy W., Sean F., Jennifer D., and Adam W. Each of you will be receiving a $25 Amazon gift card. Use it well and have a good time with that. With that being said, I do have one more polling question for the rest of our audience, and please answer this, guys. We all came here dressed up in costume. A lot of us aren't going to any Halloween parties this year. But whether you're going to a party or not, with everything going on, are you still putting on a costume for Halloween? If you wouldn't mind answering for us, just a simple yes or no. I don't want to take up too much time. I'm going to close things up here in about 5 seconds. Yes, no, 5, 4, 3, 2, one more. Come on, give me another couple of votes here. We're over a half. All right, I'm closing the poll. And the results are, wow, 2/3 of us, no costumes. So here's my DevOps advice. Whether you're going to a party at night, put your costume on tomorrow and walk around the house in it. I forgot how much fun it is to dress up. I may never take the wig off. I enjoy having hair again. But that being said, that's going to call a wrap on this version of our DevOps Unbound Roundtable. Let me thank our amazing panel members here. Sasha, Parag, Mitchell, Tracy, Jasmine. Jasmine, we're looking for big things from you over at Twitter. And the incredible invisible man, Derek Weeks. Thank you for joining us. And I know you tried moving heaven on earth to get that camera to work. We'll be looking on Twitter for your costume pictures. Reminder also, Derek's All Day DevOps is, Derek, November 12th?
November 12th, 24 hours online free. That's it.
Okay, so check that out. Until then, this is your hippy dippy DevOps dude, Alan Schimmel, wishing you peace, love, and understanding. Have a great day, everyone. Bye-bye.